Today, Pete Hegseth stood at a Pentagon podium for the first time in 12 days and said something that carries more strategic weight than any missile count or strike report from the past 32 days of this war. He said, "Regime change has occurred. Let me explain exactly what that means, why it matters, and why Iran fired a missile at a fully loaded oil tanker in Dubai harbor on the same day. Start with the Pentagon briefing, because it is not what it appears." Hegseth declared that the Islamic Republic of Iran has undergone regime change, meaning, in the administration's framing, that the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei on February 28th and the subsequent appointment of his son Mojtaba Khamenei constitutes a transition to a new regime. He added, "This new regime should be wiser than the last." He said the primary focus of the United States is now pursuing a deal that will end the war, and that Trump doesn't bluff and doesn't back down. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, announced for the first time that B-52 bomber missions have begun flying overland above Iranian territory, a significant escalatory step beyond standoff strikes, and that for the first time in the war, the U.S. has targeted what Kane described as nuclear weapons research and development labs. Hegseth did not rule out ground troops in Iran when asked directly. He said the military aims to be unpredictable. He said U.S. strikes are damaging the morale of the Iranian military, leading to widespread desertions, key personnel shortages, and frustrations amongst senior leaders. He said Iran's internet has been cut to 99.9% of the population. Now step back from all of that and look at what the briefing is actually doing. Hegseth's regime change has occurred declaration is not a military assessment. It is a political off-ramp. By characterizing Mojtaba Khamenei as a new regime, the administration is constructing a narrative that allows the United States to claim its war objective, regime change, has been achieved without having achieved the conditions that would actually constitute regime change in any operational sense. The Islamic Republic's institutional structure is intact. Its parliament is functioning and passing legislation on Hormuz tolls. Its IRGC is launching its 87th wave of regional attacks. Its president is taking calls from Pakistan and China. The regime is not changed. A new supreme leader has been appointed through the existing constitutional mechanism. That is succession, not regime change. But here is why the framing matters politically. It creates the conditions for a mission accomplished declaration. The Wall Street Journal reported on Tuesday, citing sources familiar with the administration's internal deliberations, that Trump is willing to end military operations in Iran without requiring the Strait of Hormuz to be reopened first. This is a fundamental shift from every public American position since the war began. Every ultimatum Trump issued, the 48-hour deadline, the 5-day extension, the 10-day extension to April 6th, was premised on the strait being reopened as a condition for halting strikes. If Trump is now privately accepting that the strait can remain closed when the U.S. ends its operations, then the entire structure of the last 3 weeks of diplomacy, ultimatums, and deadlines was either negotiating theater or a genuine strategic retreat, or both. Iran struck a fully loaded Kuwaiti oil tanker called the Al Salmi in Dubai port on Tuesday. This is distinct from every previous maritime action in this war. Previous attacks targeted vessels in the Strait of Hormuz itself, in the open Gulf, or at sea off the Gulf Coast. Dubai is one of the world's busiest commercial ports. The Al Salmi was docked at a berth. This was not interdiction of a moving vessel. This was a precision strike on a named ship in a named port in a UAE city. The message is explicit. Iran can reach inside the commercial infrastructure of the Gulf's most economically significant city. Iran's IRGC said the passage of ships to and from ports belonging to allies and supporters of the Zionist American enemies to any destination and via any corridor is prohibited. The Al Salmi was Kuwaiti flagged. Iran is now defining Kuwaiti ports as legitimate targets for having facilitated American and Israeli military operations. The Dow Jones responded by falling more than 1,000 points on Tuesday morning, its worst single-day drop since April 2025. The gas price number that crossed the wire today is a domestic political threshold. The average U.S. gas price hit $4 a gallon on March 31st, the highest since 2022. The previous monthly record increase for U.S. gas prices was set after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. This month's increase has exceeded that. The political significance is not abstract. $4 gasoline is the level at which ordinary American voters, not investors, not policy analysts, not foreign policy experts, feel the cost of this war in their daily lives. It appears on every gas station sign they drive past. It represents roughly a $1 per gallon increase since February 28th. And it is rising not because of a hurricane or a supply disruption from an external event, but because of a war that 59% of Americans told Pew Research in March they believe the U.S. made the wrong decision to start. Trump responded to the gas price news on Tuesday by posting on Truth Social calling on the UK and other countries that can't get jet fuel because of the Strait of Hormuz to go to Hormuz and just take it. He said that the U.S. won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us. He also lashed out at France, accusing it of closing its airspace to U.S. planes carrying military supplies to Israel and saying the U.S. will remember France's move. These posts, appearing the same morning Hegseth held a Pentagon briefing about pursuing a deal, represent the clearest illustration yet of the communication chaos inside this administration's war management. Hegseth is at the Pentagon describing the war's primary objective as a diplomatic resolution. Trump is simultaneously on Truth Social threatening allies and demanding they fight for their own oil. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Trump is willing to end the war without the strait being reopened. Iran, reading all of this, responded by hitting a tanker in Dubai Harbor. Now for the B-52 overland missions. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane announced Tuesday that the U.S. has begun flying B-52 Stratofortress bombers in overland missions above Iranian territory, not standoff strikes from outside Iranian airspace, but actual flight paths over Iran. This is operationally and symbolically significant. The B-52 is a Cold War-era bomber with enormous payload capacity, capable of carrying both conventional and, though not deployed in this context, nuclear munitions. Flying them overland above Iran is a demonstration of the complete absence of Iranian air defense capability at this stage of the war. Iran cannot shoot down a B-52 flying over Tehran. That is a message as much as a military action. Kane also said, for the first time in any Pentagon briefing, that the U.S. has targeted nuclear weapons research and development labs. This is the first official U.S. acknowledgement that, beyond striking the name nuclear enrichment sites at Natanz, Fordow, Isfahan, and Bushehr, the U.S. has been striking facilities associated specifically with weapons research as distinct from civilian or enrichment infrastructure. What this confirms, tactically, is that U.S. intelligence has identified and is acting on a target list that goes beyond the declared nuclear program into the covert or nascent weapons development layer of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. This is information Iran would very much prefer to deny exists. The China-Pakistan Joint Initiative arrived on Tuesday as the most structured peace proposal the war has yet produced from external parties. Pakistan's Foreign Minister is Xueqin, who traveled to Beijing despite having fractured his shoulder in a fall on Sunday, a detail that signals the urgency Islamabad is attaching to this diplomatic moment, met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The five-point joint initiative they released together calls for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate start of peace negotiations, an end to strikes on civilian infrastructure, the restoration of normal passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and protection of the security of ships and their crews. This is the first time China has attached its name to a specific peace framework for this conflict. Beijing has maintained strategic ambiguity throughout the war, condemning strikes on civilians while avoiding direct confrontation with Washington. Today's initiative is China stepping into the diplomatic architecture as a named co-author of terms. That has weight. It means that any negotiated settlement going forward will need to at least reference or respond to the framework Beijing and Islamabad have now jointly published. It also means that if Washington rejects these terms publicly, it does so visibly, in writing, in response to a named Chinese proposal. The diplomatic cost of rejection is now higher. Iran's IRGC issued a threat on Tuesday that has received almost no mainstream coverage but carries significant long-term implications. The IRGC formally warned that 18 American technology companies, including Microsoft, Apple, Google, Intel, and Boeing, are now considered legitimate military targets in response to what it described as U.S. and Israeli terrorist operations. The IRGC statement named these companies specifically as entities that finance the U.S. military budget and are therefore targets under its stated operational framework. This threat should be understood in the context of Iran's documented cyber capabilities. Iran has carried out multiple significant cyber attacks on U.S. and Israeli infrastructure in the past decade. During this conflict, Iran struck Stryker, a U.S. medical supply company, with a cyber attack earlier this month. The IRGC threat against Apple, Google, and Microsoft is not a threat to bomb Silicon Valley. It is a threat to conduct cyber attacks against their Gulf region campuses, their data centers, their regional infrastructure, or their operational systems. The UAE hosts campuses of New York University, Texas A&M, and Northwestern, all of which the IRGC separately threatened last week. The convergence of physical infrastructure threats against Gulf-hosted American institutions and cyber threats against American technology companies represents an escalation vector that sits entirely outside the military strike and counterstrike dynamic that most coverage focuses on. On the ground today, the IDF conducted what it described as over 230 strikes against Iranian infrastructure in the past 24 hours, including against air defense systems in Tehran, ballistic missile launchers ready for launch, and weapons production facilities. Large explosions were reported in Isfahan. In Lebanon, the IDF issued evacuation warnings for additional neighborhoods in Beirut's southern suburbs and conducted overnight strikes. At least 3 Indonesian UN peacekeepers have been killed in southern Lebanon since Sunday, a development that has drawn formal condemnation from Jakarta and is straining the U.S.-Indonesia relationship at a moment when Washington is seeking broader coalition support. Saudi Arabia intercepted 8 ballistic missiles targeting Riyadh and the eastern province. Bahrain sounded alarms. A NATO interception system shot down an Iranian missile heading toward Turkey, the 4th such interception since the war began. Iran's IRGC Navy confirmed the death of Admiral Ali Reza Tangsiri, the naval commander killed in last Thursday's Israeli strike, finally issuing an official statement after days of silence. The Iran Parliament's Transport Committee approved a formal toll system for Strait of Hormuz transit. This is the legislative formalization of what has been happening informally since at least March 23rd, when Lloyd's List Intelligence first confirmed that vessels were paying Iran for passage. The toll system, once enacted into law, transforms the strait from an international waterway under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea into what Iran is structuring as a sovereign transit corridor under Iranian administrative control. The GCC Secretary General has called this economic terrorism against every nation. The international community has called it a violation of UNCLOS. Iran is proceeding regardless. April 6th is 6 days away. That is the date Trump set as the deadline for Iran to open the strait or face obliteration of its energy infrastructure, a threat that now reportedly may not be executed even if the strait remains closed, based on the Wall Street Journal's reporting about Trump's internal position. The gap between Trump's public threats and his private willingness has never been wider than it is today. Iran struck a tanker in Dubai. Hegseth declared regime change. B-52s flew over Tehran. Gas hit $4. China joined the peace initiative. And the Dow lost 1,000 points. Day 32, 6 days to April 6th. There is one final dynamic from today that should not be buried in the operational details. The GCC states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, are being struck by Iranian missiles and drones on a daily basis, are intercepting Iranian munitions at a rate that is exhausting their own stockpiles, and are simultaneously pressuring Trump to continue the war because they see a historic opportunity to eliminate the Iranian threat permanently. The Alma Research Center reported today that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain are actively lobbying Trump to press on, telling him this is a strategic window that will not reopen. Egypt, by contrast, is urging Trump to stop. Qatar is supporting Pakistan's mediation while maintaining its own channel. These GCC states are not passive bystanders. They are active participants in the political calculus that determines whether this war escalates, extends, or resolves. And their internal divisions between the states urging continuation and those urging ceasefire, mirror the divisions within the American administration between Hegseth's pursuit of a deal and the hawks around him who believe the regime can be brought down with a few more weeks of strikes. The war is not just between the US, Israel, and Iran. It is between competing theories of what the next month should look like. Every actor involved has a different theory. None of them agree. And the April 6th deadline is the next moment of forced decision. 6 days. And the tanker in Dubai is still burning. I will see you in the next one.